They looked at your life from a distance and assumed it was favor without friction, blessing without breaking, elevation without endurance. From the outside, your destiny looked attractive, almost effortless, like something that could be borrowed or worn without consequence. They didn't see the early rejection that carved humility into you, the unanswered prayers that taught you patience, or the long delays that forced you to trust God when nothing around you made sense. They saw the outcome but never the process, the light but not the fire that purified you. When they begged God to be you, they were asking for the visible rewards while being blind to the invisible cost that shaped you into someone capable of carrying them. They didn't know that your destiny required losing people you genuinely loved, people who promised to stay but couldn't walk the narrow path with you. They didn't know that your calling demanded silence when you wanted to explain yourself, restraint when you were misunderstood, and obedience when everything in you wanted to quit. They didn't know how many times you had to choose faith over comfort, purpose over popularity, and obedience over approval. They asked for your life without realizing that your life was forged in moments where quitting would have been easier than continuing. What they admired was the fruit, but they never asked about the seasons of drought. They never considered the times you felt forgotten, overlooked, or delayed while watching others advance effortlessly. They never saw how God stripped you of distractions, removed safety nets, and isolated you so He could speak clearly to you. They wanted the anointing but not the crushing, the authority but not the surrender, the victory but not the warfare that came before it. They didn't understand that every level of favor came with a deeper level of responsibility and resistance. There were nights when you questioned yourself, moments when your faith was tested beyond words, seasons where your prayers felt like echoes with no response. They didn't know how often you had to encourage yourself because no one else understood what God was doing in you. They didn't see the internal battles, the self-doubt, the fear of getting it wrong while trying to obey God fully. They didn't know that your destiny required you to walk forward even when clarity came one step at a time, trusting God without seeing the full picture. They assumed your strength was natural, not realizing it was built through pressure. They thought your wisdom came easily, not knowing it was born from painful lessons, hard consequences, and divine correction. They wanted your discernment without the betrayals that sharpened it, your confidence without the failures that humbled you, your peace without the storms that taught you how to anchor your soul in God alone. They asked God for your position without understanding that your position was earned through obedience in obscurity. What they didn't realize is that your destiny demanded spiritual maturity early. While others were free to drift, you were required to grow. While others blended in, you were set apart. While others were celebrated, you were prepared. God trusted you with weight because He knew you could carry it, even when it felt unfair, even when it felt lonely. They begged for your life without knowing that your life was never meant to be easy, only meaningful. There were moments when you felt like you were paying a price no one else around you was paying, moments when you wondered why your road felt steeper and your progress slower. They never saw how often God asked you to wait when you were ready to move, to let go when you wanted to hold on, to forgive when you were deeply wounded. They didn't see how obedience cost you relationships, opportunities, and versions of yourself you had to leave behind. They admired your resilience without understanding how many times you had to rise after being broken. They envied your clarity without knowing how long you walked in confusion. They wanted your spiritual authority without submitting to the refining process that taught you humility and dependence on God. They desired your destiny without realizing that destiny isn't a gift you receive once, but a path you must choose daily, often at personal cost. When they begged God to be you, they didn't know that your calling required you to stand alone when others walked away, to remain faithful when results were delayed, and to keep believing when evidence was scarce. They didn't know that your journey involved being misunderstood, mislabeled, and underestimated, yet still called to love, serve, and obey without bitterness. They didn't understand that your life demanded a level of discipline, spiritual sensitivity, and surrender that most people aren't willing to maintain. They saw the blessing, but not the burden. They saw the destiny, but not the discipline. They saw the purpose, but not the price you paid in silence, tears, and unwavering faith, a price that continues to shape you, stretch you, and prepare you for what God is still unfolding through your life. Being chosen was never about comfort, and that truth reveals itself slowly, through loss, pressure, and moments where the weight feels heavier than your strength. The isolation didn't happen by accident. God separated you because the assignment required clarity, and clarity can't survive constant noise. People drifted away not because you weren't enough, but because they couldn't go where you were being led. The loneliness was part of the preparation, a space where God stripped away distractions and taught you how to hear His voice without interference. What felt like abandonment was actually alignment, even when it hurt more than you could explain. The pressure you carry isn't normal pressure. It's the kind that forces growth whether you're ready or not. Expectations placed on you from a young stage of your journey made life feel heavier than it looked for others. You were required to be strong when you wanted to be soft, wise when you were still learning, disciplined when others were allowed to be careless. The weight trained you to think deeper, pray harder, and move more intentionally. You learned quickly that mistakes cost you more, that delays stretched longer, and that obedience was non-negotiable. Sacrifice followed you everywhere. You sacrificed comfort for calling, familiarity for faith, and ease for endurance. While others enjoyed shortcuts, you were required to take the long road. While others celebrated prematurely, you were told to wait. Opportunities you wanted had to be laid down because they weren't aligned, relationships you valued had to be released because they were holding you back, versions of yourself had to die so something greater could live. Each sacrifice felt personal, like something was being taken from you, yet each one carved space for what God intended to place inside you. Isolation taught you how to self-reflect without condemnation. You learned to sit with your thoughts, confront your flaws, and allow God to correct you without resisting. In the quiet seasons, your character was refined more than your visibility. You learned that being unseen doesn't mean being inactive, and that preparation often looks like stillness. The silence trained you to find validation in God instead of people, peace in obedience instead of applause, and confidence in purpose rather than position. The pressure exposed what was real inside you. It revealed fears you didn't know you carried, doubts you tried to ignore, and wounds you thought time would heal on its own. Underweight, everything surfaces. God allowed the pressure not to crush you, but to show you what needed healing. You learned that strength doesn't mean pretending you're okay, but allowing God to meet you in your weakness. You learned to pray honestly, not impressively, to cry without shame, and to keep moving even when your hands were shaking. Sacrifice reshaped your priorities. Things that once mattered lost their grip, and things you never valued became essential. You learned to guard your energy, your words, and your spirit. You learned that access to you is sacred, not everyone deserves closeness, and not every invitation is alignment. You became selective not out of pride, but out of wisdom earned through pain. Each sacrifice sharpened your discernment, teaching you the difference between good and God, between urgent and important, between distraction and assignment. Isolation also protected you. God hid you while you were healing, refining, and learning. He kept you away from environments that would have exploited your gifts before your character was ready. You weren't delayed, you were being preserved. What felt like being left behind was actually God keeping you from being prematurely exposed. In isolation, you were trained to carry yourself with integrity even when no one was watching, to remain faithful without external reward. The pressure strengthened your spiritual endurance. You learned how to stand firm when emotions fluctuated, how to trust God when outcomes were uncertain, and how to keep your heart soft while your life felt hard. You learned that faith isn't proven in moments of abundance, but in seasons where nothing changes and you're still called to believe. The weight forced you to build spiritual muscle, resilience that can't be shaken by delay or disappointment. Sacrifice taught you surrender. Not passive surrender, but active obedience. You learned how to release control, how to stop forcing outcomes, and how to let God lead even when the direction felt uncomfortable. Each sacrifice was an act of trust, a declaration that God's plan was greater than your preferences. You learned that holding on too tightly can hinder what God is trying to do, and that letting go often hurts before it heals. Isolation, pressure, and sacrifice weren't punishments. They were evidence of trust. God trusted you with weight because He knew you wouldn't abandon the process. He trusted you with solitude because He knew you would seek Him, not substitutes. He trusted you with loss because He knew you could endure without becoming bitter. The hidden cost of being chosen is that you are shaped in ways others never see, refined in places others never go, and prepared for responsibilities others never carry. The pain was never random, even when it felt excessive and unfair. Every delay, every loss, every moment of confusion carried purpose beyond what you could see at the time. God allowed the pain not because He wanted to harm you, but because there were things that could only be formed through pressure and fire. Some lessons don't come through instruction, they come through experience. The pain positioned you to understand depth, empathy, and discernment in ways comfort never could. What tried to break you instead became the very thing that shaped how you move, think, and respond now. There were seasons where nothing made sense, where prayers felt unanswered and progress felt invisible. In those moments, it was easy to believe you were being overlooked or punished. But God was working below the surface, strengthening roots that would later support heavy fruit. While others were growing outward, you were growing inward. Character was being developed where applause couldn't interfere. Integrity was being built where shortcuts weren't available. The pain slowed you down so you wouldn't arrive unprepared. God allowed the pain to separate you from dependency on people. When support fell away and familiar voices went silent, you were forced to lean into Him fully. You learned how to hear God for yourself, not through crowds or confirmation from others. The loneliness taught you discernment, showing you who was assigned to your journey and who was only seasonal. Pain clarified relationships, revealing intentions that comfort would have kept hidden. What felt like rejection was actually redirection. The hardship positioned you to lead differently. Because you've been wounded, you recognize wounds in others. Because you've struggled, you approach people with compassion rather than judgment. Pain stripped away arrogance and replaced it with humility. It taught you that strength doesn't come from control, but from surrender. God allowed the pain so your purpose wouldn't be polluted by pride or driven by ego. He shaped your heart before He expanded your influence. There were moments when obedience felt like it was costing you everything. You did the right thing and still lost. You stayed faithful and still faced delay. You forgave and still weren't restored. Pain tested whether your obedience was conditional or rooted. God used those moments to anchor your faith deeper than outcomes. You learned to obey without guarantees, to trust without timelines, and to believe without evidence. The pain also sharpened your spiritual awareness. You became sensitive to what others overlook, discerning shifts, motives, and atmospheres. You learned when to speak and when to stay silent, when to move and when to wait. Pain trained you to listen beyond words and see beyond appearances. What once felt like overthinking became wisdom refined through experience. God positioned you to navigate complexity because your assignment requires depth. God allowed the pain to empty you of false identities. Roles, labels, expectations, and people's projections were stripped away until only what was real remained. When everything external fell apart, you were forced to confront who you were without validation. That confrontation was painful, but it was necessary. You discovered your worth wasn't tied to performance, approval, or productivity. Purpose became internal before it ever became visible. The pain positioned you for endurance. You learned how to keep going when motivation fades, how to remain steady when emotions fluctuate, and how to stay faithful when circumstances don't change. This endurance is essential for where God is taking you. What lies ahead requires consistency, not intensity. Pain taught you how to endure without becoming hardened, how to stay soft without becoming weak. There were losses you didn't recover from quickly, disappointments that left marks, prayers that took longer than expected. God allowed those moments to teach you timing. You learned that delay doesn't mean denial and that waiting can be an act of trust. Pain slowed your pace so you wouldn't outrun God. It taught you patience that can't be learned through success alone. God also used pain to align you with the right environment. Certain doors closed because you weren't meant to grow there. Certain paths ended because they would have limited you. The pain of closure was protection in disguise. What felt like God saying no was actually Him saying not this, not here, not now. Each painful ending redirected you closer to your true assignment. The positioning wasn't instant, and it wasn't obvious. It happened quietly, over time, through repeated choices to trust God despite disappointment. Pain became a teacher, not a prison. It refined your voice, clarified your vision, and strengthened your resolve. God allowed the pain because your purpose requires depth, maturity, and resilience that only suffering can produce, and everything you endured has been aligning you for a role that demands wisdom, compassion, and unwavering faith.